Good morning and afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. And welcome to a new installation of the Pure Leadership series. For those who do not know, my name is Winston Thomas, and I'm the editor-in-chief for CDOTrends. And today I will be your host for what I think will be a very interesting discussion. First, this series is made possible by Pure Storage, and we've worked together to create discussions on key challenges that they hear and we hear as journalists that you are asking. We have had a few of this over the course of last year and this year, where we tackled the most vexing question on data from a practitioner's point of view. Today, we will be tackling the topic of data sovereignty. In particular, we will address the theme Data Sovereignty Imperative, Navigating a New Era of Control and AI Innovation. The challenge with data sovereignty is that it's a moving target, besides being a mouthful for some of us. Regulators and governments are becoming more clinical in their interpretation of this issue. Legislation and guidelines are evolving and catching up as we speak. Challenge is compounded by the fact our region is not like the US or EU. We have different countries at different levels of data maturity and have different interpretations of what data sovereignty means. As many of you know, the reasons to practice data sovereignty are also very diverse, but mostly aim to restrict certain data transfer across borders. We all know that we need data to learn and make accurate recommendations, but data sovereignty increases this complexity. There is also a rising need to go deeper than data architectures and examine the underlying data infrastructure and whether it is flexible and agile. Lastly, we will need to consider multi-cloud architectures, technical debt, and data fragmentation risk. Now, with many companies going into machine learning and AI, and where real-time AI and analytics is becoming vital, this is only going to go complex. So what can a data like yourself do? To answer this question, we have brought in three panelists. So let me introduce them first. First, we have Alex Vasilenko, Head of Business Intelligence and Data Strategy for Southeast Asia at British American Tobacco. Representing another highly regulated environment, we have Pintu Kumar Ghosh, Lead for Business Solutions, Data Analytics, Standard Chartered Bank from Singapore. And lastly, from the solution and vendor community, we have Mark Jobbins, Chief Technology Officer and Vice President for Asia Pacific and Japan at Pure Storage. Now, before we begin, I would like to highlight one major rule in all my discussions. This discussion today is not just about us. We want you to be part of it. So feel free to comment, question, and remark using the Q&A button. Again, please don't use the chat button at the bottom. This is just for our own internal communications. Instead, please use the Q&A button and be part of this conversation. Now, let's start. And we will begin with knowing more about you. So we have a polling questions. Could we have the polling questions up? Great. So we want to understand what are the key challenges in AI adoption. This is not just about data sovereignty. You will see a list. Please do tick so that we can shape our discussion in real time towards what you are putting up there. And if any of those options are not to your taste, or if you feel that you're going to be ticking others, please just state in a few words or one or two words what that others mean. I'll leave you to answer this poll, and we will come back to this poll soon. But for now, let me start with each of the panelists to understand and discuss how important data sovereignty is to their data strategy and design. Maybe, Alex, you can start the discussion.
Hello, everyone. In terms of the importance of data sovereignty, I will be coming, first of all, from the industry where we operate. So, as the host has mentioned, I'm representing British American Tobacco, and many of you know that the tobacco markets, they are very highly regulated across the different countries and different locations. And mainly those regulations, they impact the way how we access the customer and how we access consumer data. So within our industry, we divide customers and consumers, because customers, they've been working with us directly, and consumers, they've been the direct consumers who are buying basically the tobacco products and let's say the nicotine products from the local shops. So in this case, the data sovereignty has been the key aspect on the way how we've been accepted to purchase and to work with external data, and how we actually work with data that we receive from the third parties as a part of the partnership or as a part of the kind of the purchasing scenarios. So if we do not store the data correctly, or if we're not being compliant with the local legislation, with the local SOX requirements, for example, we'll be banned from continuing the business. And having the fact that we cannot have the direct view on the way how the consumers are interacting with our products, unless we can see the aggregated sales data, this will leave us blind. So if we compare the tobacco markets to some other FMCG markets, with some other FMCG markets, let's say the soft drinks, usually the businesses are able almost in real time see the way how different products being launched, how they've been sold, how the marketing campaigns are performing. With us, we cannot basically see it. So all the vision that we have is more like the artificial vision that is provided by the third-party data and by the data that we can predict or pre-model. So we call them synthetic data. So answering your question and wrapping up my answer, I would say that the sovereignty and the governance as a part of the sovereignty is being one of the key aspects that allows us to kind of handle the business, and it allows us to properly manage the ongoing business performance without being like urgently looking for other sources of data, for example, just on the way.
Thank you for that. I'll move to Pintu. What about yourself, coming from the banking industry?
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, so in terms of my view, point of view, like, I have been in this industry quite a long time in terms of data and AI. So definitely data governance, and with the ambit of data governance and data sovereignty plays a pivotal role there. So being into the financial industry, which is a highly regulated, definitely we have been, there are a lot of process we have to follow. At the same time, we have to ensure that we don't compromise on our customer deliverable in terms of quality, performance and other thing. So how do we do that? So we have basically, in my experience, have been so provided the solution which could be taken care of multi-country sovereignty requirement in terms of data security. Like, just one example is like, the country like, China, Taiwan, or India, Pakistan, they may have the cross-border rules in terms of data sharing. It could be that it's a different domain, rather than data privacy. So it takes care of data sovereignty, takes care of whether these data is originated from so and so country, then how do you manage it? So this is the utmost priority, should be all organization, and I believe this should be the part of your data management practice as a data risk for all your organization, the way you want to manage data in your overall data life cycle. So data security, data privacy, data governance, or data risk, as well as the data sovereignty is one of them, which is still emerging. Yeah, so a lot of maturity we have to, many companies has to adhere to and achieve it. So in short, yes, we have a lot of companies started doing it, including all financial sector, highly regulated, they have to follow. And then having said that, lot of areas where we have to reach to the new heights of the maturity. Yeah.
Mark, what are you hearing from your customers and in the street in terms of data sovereignty? How much of an issue are people looking at it in terms of that versus all the other challenges that comes?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And yeah, obviously, yeah, we're talking about one of the, I guess, the most interesting topics in in the market at the moment around AI. Pretty well every organization that I'm speaking to has a series of AI projects underway and are looking at how can we leverage this emerging technology to gain greater insight for their customers and create different products and services for them. And it is exciting. Yeah, that's the great thing. But I think one of the challenges that I'm constantly hearing now is the pace that things are changing. So it's very difficult to perhaps predict what workloads look like in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 12 months' time. So that's sort of causing some consternation, I guess, for organizations looking at their infrastructure models. If you then wrap around a fairly dynamic environment around legislation, then I think, again, organizations are wanting to really sort of try and de-risk their environments. So, yeah, look, there's been, some very sort of highly publicized and recognized privacy initiatives out of, out of Europe in particular. It's flowing around the world, as you would expect. But what I'm seeing is in certain countries, you're getting far more of a push around AI sovereignty orientated initiatives. So India's pushing that very hard themselves. We go up into Japan and there's a sovereignty issue around there where they wanted to really push hard on keeping and maintaining that information within their legislation. Singapore, we recognize that Singapore wants to become and is pushing very hard to become a major hub for AI innovation in the Asia Pacific region. And there's legislation that goes along with that. So the reason I'm sort of highlighting those is that's just around AI, but I'm also seeing a lot of organizations having to focus on, I guess, that resiliency and ability to recover information as well. I'm going to tie it all together in a second, Winston, honestly, on this one. But, we're sort of seeing legislation about where the data can be held. Organizations are then potentially being held to, being able to protect critical infrastructure in those different regions. So that all comes into a higher risk profile for organizations. So I think what I'm starting to see is far more of a focus for these enterprise organizations to come in and go, I want to get ahead of the curve. I want to de-risk and essentially potentially decouple some of this data that's coming from multiple sources and locations to make it cleaner and easier to manage going forward. So it's really putting the foundations in place. And I think that's a pivot a little bit where possibly initially, the view was the more data I can get, the more diverse that data can be, the more places I can get it from, the greater training I can provide. But we're seeing that flow-on effect as to having to justify where that information's come, being able to identify where it's come from and not do that cross-border population. So, Winston, I'll probably give you the longest answer out of all of us, but I think that's the thing that's sort of coming together that I'm seeing from a technology perspective. There's just this little bit of a change where you might have had very wide-reaching sort of cloud architectures going across multiple domains and multiple locations where people are starting to want to segment that and control that a little bit more to then be able to have confidence to dive in and use that information, that data in those areas. So that's one of the areas that I'm sort of seeing, and I'm sure Alex and Pinto would be experiencing some of that in their own organizations and wanting to reduce the risk profiles in it.
That's a good point. And Mark, you just answered like 4 of my questions.
Oh, sorry.
That's good. Okay. And there's a few points that Alex and Pinto highlighted, which I also wanted to pick up before I go to the de-risking part. But first, I'd like to bring out the poll answers, because we are all assuming we know what they want. Not unusual to see the first one, which is cost. But right second to that is the data storage infrastructure. which is the second key challenge with our audience. After that, there's a tie between data growth and having compute power. Maybe I'd like to just throw this quickly to our guests, panelists, to see, or do they agree with what's happening? Alex, what do you think?
First of all, very interesting results. I can see that cost is the main point of complexity and the key challenge. To be honest with you, I would disagree. First of all, because the cost is being high now. But if you see the projections over the next, I would say, decade, the general costs of AI and of data training and data availability will be slightly decreasing, and the cost will not actually stay the same according to the other challenges as well. So I would say, in general, the data storage infrastructure might be a big challenge. We don't experience it, but might be a big challenge, especially if we talk about anything related to computer vision, because if we run the training by ourselves, then the quality of video that is constantly increasing and the quality of media files in general will be increasing as well. So the storage will be going quite high. The data growth will be going quite high as well. And in general, the computing power with the development of all this cloud stuff being more and more available will be decreasing across the other things. You can also relate it to, I would say, the phenomenon of NVIDIA that has happened during the recent year, and the way how those guys have provided their nodes and how they have reshuffled the hosting models and made even the large language models and their own layer of generative AI and semantic graphs more publicly available, especially for the large organizations and for the medium-sized businesses, and especially for the startups. So in this case, again, the cost of computing power on this example is actually decreasing. If I'm talking on our example of British Tobacco, at this case we stick with sort of like the corporate level, the global corporate level Azure services. So again, this is more the challenge of the whole agreement rather than just the computing power for AI or generative AI.
Thanks, Alex. Pinto, what do you think? Cost is high, but I see governance and regulation is also down there as the second biggest choice, and then data storage infrastructure. Your thoughts on that?
My personal thought in terms of what I face, I think it should be the governance and regulation, which is like, there are a few acts in 2023 Europe Europe Act on AI. So that has been introduced. So given that, the certain countries, certain companies which will be operating multiple countries, regions. So governance is one of the aspects. You have to be very 100% clear, because the AI cannot be applied only across the board, across the industry, because there are certain use cases like the prohibited area, like the healthcare, the financial sector, and kind of the regulation. So we have like but again, giving back to the governance, like that we have ISO IEC 42001, which has been laid down in 2023, which has given guiding how we should be managing the AI projects. So definitely, on one hand, we have to encourage. On the other hand, we have to manage the risk. Any new technology comes with a risk and challenges. So if we manage that, then that's when we have the high risk, medium risk, and then low risk, right? So accordingly, we should apply. So yeah, so to my mind, I think marketing area, which is something, and other areas where into the financial sector itself, which can be robustly used, but instead of any credit decisioning, I think still some access should not apply. So to my mind, definitely it plays a pivotal role to go ahead with that. In terms of storage and other, yes, of course, there would be challenges in terms of storage. capacity computing, and in terms of cost budget, also there has to be customer, buying, business buying, so which are also equally important factor. Yeah, of course, the recent trend also ESG aspect we have to take care of, right? So we have to design any AI system which has to take care of your overall organization sustainability goal. ESG risk has to be managed. Okay, so I think these are the main factors to my mind.
Mark, your thoughts? It looks like as if it really speaks to your new announcement. So,
yeah, look, it does, Winston, and it's interesting. We just completed actually 3 surveys. We're doing multiple surveys in different countries at the moment, asking, organizations, what are those challenges? So pretty well similar to your poll. We recently, completed one in Singapore, Japan, and Australia. And it's sort of echoing the feedback from our attendees today. There were certain common themes that were coming up. Interesting, probably echoing Alex's comment around cost. That wasn't necessarily the highest area. The bit that people saw was underestimating the amount of compute power that they needed, and they were quite staggered about how much they needed in that area. The same for the data storage, and quite often underestimating that by over 2x. So there was a huge hit there. But the other one was also around, from a cost perspective, the cost of the utilities to actually drive that infrastructure. Particularly came up in Singapore, and in Australia in particular had mispredicted the amount of power that would be needed to actually drive that. And pretty well every country seems to be there's an increase in cost in those services as well. So cost from a different perspective, Alex, that people had seen the actual operational running of this, was a challenge. And then, that fear of tech debt as well. So, could they respond quickly enough to actually keep the right technology in place, be that at the compute layer, so those GPU, compute layers, or probably, the bit that we're hearing more around is that data management, very concerned around getting either islands of data and not being able to leverage, the right data platforms to essentially feed some of these very data intensive and hungry applications that are out there. So again, sort of echoing what is in, so that it's a nice validation, to be honest, Winston, that the attendees today seem to be having similar concerns and focus on this area.
Before I switch back to our discussion on data sovereignty, just want to tell the audience that, hey, please do participate, join our conversation, do ask your questions using the Q&A button. I'll be posing those questions to the panelists who will answer using a lot of their experience. Also, please make sure the questions is on topic and not something else, but just keep the discussion flowing and do ask your most important vexing questions. Now, I'd like to switch to Alex. Alex, you mentioned something right up front, synthetic data. And we are in the topic of data sovereignty and trying to find solutions around different types of regulations. How important is synthetic data? And at this moment, do you see synthetic data as a solution, or is it a two-headed hydra where it's also creating problems?
I would say the other way around. Synthetic data, this is the outcome. So this is not the solution, but this is the business solution. So this is not the solution for the data sovereignty. This is the outcome from the proper setup of data governance and data regulations and the compliance. The reason why I'm saying this, synthetic data mainly, and again, I'm talking from the area where I work and where my team is working. Synthetic data is actually being an amazing solution for especially the areas where the business is not seeing their results directly. It's not able to get the straightforward feeds of data. And I've given you the example. We cannot see what's happening with the market, with the results straight away. So we need to wait. We need to check the, for example, figures from logistics, from finance, and everything else. So synthetic data becomes sort of like a mixer that gives the augmented reality in terms of the corporate data set. However, would it be correct or not if we don't have the governance in place? Of course not, because everyone knows the garbage in, garbage out within the machine learning space. So this space is quite important. Then the regulations and SOX compliance. If we are not compliant with the local laws, if we do not store the data correctly, if we do not work with the, let's say, personal data or the financial data or the financial transaction with the third parties, with our partners, basically. In this case, we will just lose one feet on the one track, and then the synthetic data will be not correct again. So we will just damage the way how we provide such a fragile space. So synthetic data is being the outcome from the proper compliance regulations and governance rather than the provider or the solution.
Thanks, Alex. Mark, do you have a viewpoint on that as well?
Look, I think Alex has covered that off, pretty well. It's I'm not sure that's quite the position, from us. Essentially, it's good points that Alex has raised there.
Pinto, earlier on also, you mentioned about data sovereignty and compliance because you're in a highly regulated industries. But I'm just wondering, coming from a data leader perspective, I remember in banking, you used to have the compliance team that used to take over all these challenges right up front. How's that interaction or that conversation going with the compliance teams? And when do you, as a data leader, assume some of this compliance issue as part of your remit?
I think I'll try to answer based on my personal opinion basis, like, how things happen, like, financial phase, right? So any data projects starts, right? It has to start with, starting from your planning phase to the entire data life cycle. How do you design, and then how do you data is being used by the consumer? So end-to-end data life cycle, you have to take care of all the aspect. And every financial organization, they have set of policies, data governance or data privacy or data sovereignty policies, they have already jotted down. So you have to ensure during the data lifecycle design, you take care of all these policies to the minimum expectation point of view, so that, I think there is a governance policy in terms of data governance or risk management policy with 3 lines of defense. So the business is sitting into the first line, but as a 1.5 to 2, right? So wherein your application owner comes in, right? Whichever application you are building as a part of your data solution, so you have to take care of the certain expectation from the second line, third line, so that, and so you are mitigating the risk, so layering your risk. So any risk and compliance, before they have highlighting your issues in terms of risk and compliance, you got to have that, analyze, do your due diligence, self assessment. All of this you have to factor in your early stages of your development life cycle, so that you do not come across in a situation, so your bottleneck, you are not able to deliver to the client because of so and so compliance or risk management issues. So definitely this is the process. It is a mature process in terms of the enterprise risk management. So this has to be followed. Other organization is encouraged to do any kind of data risk management. So they have to, this is the best practice. They have to also start embedding this type of process during SDLC or product development life cycle. So I would think whichever methodology you follow, it has to be in the core. So using this approach, I definitely we have been able to manage all expectation, and anything is not based on my experience, what I see that, definitely we recognize anything can be done, can be improved. We take it as a technical dev and take it forward. So that is the way forward. Yeah. And with the proper risk management practices. Yeah.
Just wanted to continue that discussion because we have a question from the audience in terms of if you add AI to the mix, which is getting data, how are you actually doing, what kind of challenges does that pose to compliance, especially in banking? And what does that mean when you're reporting to regulators? Could you just give us a quick your personal viewpoint on that?
There are two type of AI projects. Someone in the financial industry will go through. So one is traditional way of doing the predictive modeling, which could do, prediction. So all of these nitty-gritty come while doing your model training, your input data. So you have to take care of all your data privacy, data security, data sovereignty aspect. And there is a lot of approaches available. So I'm not sure in this question I should answer. Otherwise, I'll take it for separate question on that. There is a separate area to discuss on that. How do you manage that area? In terms of the new way of the AI process, like generative AI, which is predominantly is a paradigm shift of the traditionally we manage the AI projects. So the data, the input data, like there is a mammoth, humongous kind of data which is trained, pre-trained, and which is fed into model. So any kind of bias or any kind of data which is data inaccuracy or all of this has, there are multiple way to manage both type of AI projects. So you have to, data plays a pivotal role. So there would be a data quality management, which should be the utmost priority to manage the data quality management aspect with part of data governance umbrella. So all those your the features has plays a vital role. How do you input? So definitely my colleague already Alex told in case the garbage in garbage out thing. So without that we cannot really proceed. And the aspect of compliance, how do you manage? So one way of doing it, segregation. So how do you segregate, which I said, I'm just elaborating my question on that. How do you manage those cases? So we have to split up the data into a fragmented manner, meaning certain countries have data security violation. So meaning data sovereignty requirement in terms of how do you comply to that? Two approach. Starting from data origination to your data storage, where data is serviced, you have to take a decision whether that user who will be using the AI system is entitled to see the data, whether that data is residing that country, which is that is sovereignty, data sovereignty of that particular. So based that decisioning has to happen in the service layer. So this is one way of doing it. Second way of doing it is that you segregate all your PII data and as well as the sovereign, the country's data, which is as a highly secured, and you run a separate model, whether approach one or whether traditional AI or Gen AI model you want to build. So you have to maintain a local version of the AI model as well as the global model. So we have to then consolidate the results from the both aspect and publish it. That is one recommendation is the aggregation. So any user who are global kind of playing role based on their entitlement, you try to give them access. Aggregated data can see view by any personnel in the organization, but when it comes to data sovereignty, only the specific country's data would, like I given few examples, certain country cannot see other countries' data, so we have to be restricted. So that's how it comes from starting from data origination to data usage to AI use cases. How do you manage your AI models? All personnel has to be restricted based on your persona profile and entitlement.
Just wanted to also ask that question, the second question on sustainability. Maybe Mark, you could weigh in on that, on elaborate when you talk about power and data centers.
Yeah, look, very very happy to do that, Winston, because it is, one of those areas that, I think is getting greater focus. People and organizations are starting to sort of recognize the impact here. And as I mentioned in those surveys, it was flagged as one of the biggest, I'll say, surprises that organizations had, and then, concerns on that one. So just having a quick look at the question. Look, I think there's some stats out there. I think it's estimated about 2% of all power generated worldwide goes to running data centers and data transmission. There are ups and downs, as you can imagine, in different countries. I think here I'm actually based in Australia. I think it's about 4%. I think Singapore is about 7%, all the way through to places like Ireland over in Europe, where it's 14% of the national grid goes to running data centers. So it's a huge draw, on nations' data services. And I think what we're starting to see is, again, it's been sort of estimated about 20% of those data centers power draw is actually to store data. If we tie that back to this world where we're going, we want more data, we want to actually store more of this data, it's actually causing a bit of a conflict within these data centers, because we're seeing, if we saw the latest announcements from NVIDIA around their, GPU-based servers, increased compute power. So that's great. We can process more, but the actual power draw, is significantly higher, all the way up to, the announcement of their AI clusters, 100 kilowatts. I'm not being funny, but find me many data centers that can actually supply that level of power to racks. So what I'm actually seeing, and when I talk to some of my colleagues around the world as well, is we're seeing this squeeze within the data center where, something has to give, for want of a better word. People are investing heavily in that compute layer to be able to run these projects. And there's an increased draw from that perspective. So what else can give? We either need to be lean and mean on the network side of things. Well, networking is relatively lean and mean from a power consumption. So you look at the data piece, and being able to sort of constrain that or limit it becomes more and more important. And it's an area that Pure's been focused on for a long time. The all-flash storage solutions that we have use considerably less power and cooling than other storage models that are out there. And I think that's going to become more and more critical. In fact, I don't even think, I know it is. That's really what our customers are coming back and saying, help us solve this problem. And we want to solve the problem that they need to store, larger amounts of data within these data centers. They're constrained as to how much space do they physically have within their data centers. So I'm actually seeing in certain places, in fact, actually some of the larger cloud providers are having to shut down whole aisles of technology to provide the AI services that are out there. So people have got to focus on this as to how do we reduce this. Having a solution, to store data that, you might be able to have, 4 petabytes of storage in 10 IU consuming the equivalent of a couple of toasters suddenly solves one of those problems. And it's where our engineers keep looking at leveraging technologies such as QLC NAND to get greater density. We've had that for a number of years now, but last week we had our global customer event over in Las Vegas, actually, and the engineers announced 150 terabyte, what we call direct flash modules. There are very specific custom designed storage modules, which then means we're suddenly increasing the amount of data that can be stored in the same footprint using the same power and cooling. And that's pretty key, because I guess I see there's going to be the need for the high performant storage layer, and then the data layer will continue to expand out as people want to hold more data. And to be able to hold that, we need to have a more, I guess, a less of a footprint on the power there. And then finally, you talk about sustainability piece. It needs to be reliable as well, because I guess you can't have this, this technology being thrown away. So you need to reduce e-waste. And again, Pure's led the market in this area for some time. So, great question. I think it's going to become more and more important. As I said, exciting times around what AI and generative AI can do, but there is this flow-on effect. And I was actually presenting at a sustainability conference about a month and a half ago in Sydney, and people just hadn't thought about this. It was a little bit of a surprise that people were going, I hadn't thought about that impact on that one. So I think it's an important area.
Mark, you mentioned sustainability, and you're linking it to the data infrastructure or even the architecture. I'm just wondering, today's topic about data sovereignty, which adds a layer of complexity in terms of how your infrastructure architecture, what do people need to understand when you're talking about sustainability? And then on the other end, you have to support a multi-cloud kind of infrastructure, and where you need to even have some on-premises just to make sure you need to abide by regulations.
Yeah, and look, I think that is another one of those trends that it does tie into the data sovereignty piece. There's a couple of things that are happening. I think I'm seeing organizations doing a little bit of cloud repatriation. So, if you're starting off on your journey, then having that flexibility can be a huge benefit. But then people are starting to see the cost associated with that. And the control around where the data is. And we are seeing that people are wanting to move, some of that that data storage back into either their own on-premise or within a trusted partner that's in within their country domains. And having a platform that can actually help organizations store their data either on-premise, in a private cloud provider, or in a public cloud becomes more important, and the flexibility around that. So the Pure platform, is based around that technology and being able to do that. And again, actually last week we announced further automation around that to help organizations. But I do see a move to bringing some of that data back into local legislative areas. And it's not just for that. Sometimes it's for performance, the cost associated with that. We can get better performance and cost profiles around that as well. So, again, I'll say a hot topic. It is, people are having to think about this far more.
Thank you. Alex, I'm just wanting to know, we wanted to move to a related topic, which is data fragmentation. With data sovereignty, there is the risk of data fragmentation. How do you actually address that issue?
That's a very good question. So do you mean how do we address within the business where I am, or what is the best practice? Because that's going to be the key for my answer.
Practical. So I guess.
So I will start from the point that the business where I'm working is being the international business, and we do have the fragmentation by the nature, because some of the markets, they're being counted as the anchor markets. That means that they basically form in the landscape, and some of the markets, they be in the secondary markets. So in this case, data is not being equally distributed and equally stored, and mainly equally generated and equally governed. So the fragmentation is happening here, and the main risk is the risk of first of all, again, not following the governance and compliance. So where some fragments of data is not being reconciled, and then if the data is not reconciled, we can't really rely on some of the fragments of this data, and the whole thing is becoming obsolete. The other big risk is, of course, the exchange. So once the regulations to the end market, let's say for some sort of the country, are changing, in this case, this particular fragment is being an important piece of the puzzle, it's not being accessible anymore, or it's not being compliant, so we cannot use it. And in this case, from the practical perspective, we're always trying to find some kind of a creative solution to avoid from the business perspective the risk that some of the nodes or clusters or segment of fragment is not being accessible. So of course that's all the way of the replication, synchronizations, the cross usage of the data, and the split on the cloud environment, not the physical split, but the virtual split for the nodes and clusters. So if anything is happening unexpectedly, we can easily merge and easily replicate the data, where technically we're not replicating, we're just using the same node. So I would wrap up the answer. The biggest, I would say, and the most useful solution that we came up with to resolve the fragmentation risks is actually the logical split of the data, not the physical split of the data, whenever it is possible.
Thanks, Alex. That's really good. Pintu, your thoughts?
Yeah, in terms of data fragmentation, earlier question I was trying to answer that, we have to, definitely these are all common problem in to the modern way of managing data, which is kind of agile. So one of the data architecture, I think people needs to think through is that, the data kind of data mesh or data lakehouse kind of architecture, which is like a domain oriented design. So where data is originated, we would try to bring the data and manage the data in that domain, and then there would be overall policy governance which will be governing relating to the principle of reconciliation of data, whether they can be complete, reconciled, whether you should not, customer experience should not be distorted because of this type of problem, because we have to ensure that if I receive 10 records in terms of a structured data scenario, same 10 record has to be reconciled when data is consumed by the end user. So that has taken care of all these policies, data governance policies, all this. So, and in terms of technically, as I said, these are the two architecture should be followed. But then in terms of implementation, how we can do it, we are doing it like, either you can, segregate data like certain countries' data you cannot use by the other countries. So either you put the data over, in a storage area, you try to bring the data, but then you have to encrypt all your high sensitive data. The homomorphic kind of encryption we have to introduce. I think certain cloud platform, they support that because which has to be taken care of data security privacy aspect. And because what I'm trying to say is that you are trying to solve the problem of fragmentation, but you will end up doing the other problem. You will introduce like the data security aspect. You are segregating, but then the performance other aspect also take care of. If you architecturally take care of all aspect, then the concept comes towards right hand side usage. So during usage, you try to handle, like you want to manage this type of risk by means of showing entitlement row level security in a structural case scenario. Or the second approach could be the segregation. So you segregate like any kind of image, textual information, just country bound content you store into the dedicated area, like that data mesh or data lakehouse design, whatever you do. And then in the consumption service area, you try to use the the local versus the global AI model or report. All the aggregation abstraction layer, we try to take care of all these scenarios, so that in abstraction layer you have to ensure that from source to the usage layer, all the data can be reconciled, so that we don't miss by the data fragmentation. So that will be well managed. Yeah. So I think that is what I'm trying to highlight to my point.
Thanks, Pintu. Mark, you were nodding your head. Was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was actually. I was, I think Alex actually raised, a really important observation there around, more of that logical segmentation of the data rather than into isolated silos of data in different physical locations. I think that's, look, I've been in the industry 30 plus years, so I've seen, those trends over the years where you end up with these silos of technology, and you can't then leverage those technologies and the data that's stored in them. So it was really, I was just in vehement agreement to a point that Alex had sort of raised there. That I think it's important to be able to share that data effectively, or be able to, obviously in a secure and controlled way, but not ending up with these very isolated silos. And I think it actually sort of flows on to, that data protection piece, which is the bit that we haven't actually really discussed today. But, if you think about it, we're getting, organizations are having these huge, pools of data and information, and that's becoming more and more valuable. And we're now living in a world, where really, there are multiple threats to the security of that data, which I think is also partly driving some of that data sovereignty piece as well. That people wanting to know where it is, the ability to recover that data. Well, I protected it in the first place, but then having to recover it becomes far more of a critical function. I think for a period of time it was almost just good housekeeping to ensure data and services were protected and backed up. We've now flipped to the ability to actually have data in particular, protected and being able to recover that quickly, and probably provide multiple copies of that data for forensic analysis is now front of mind. And organizations are having to build that in to their infrastructure layers. And I think that just adds, potentially, it's I'll say another level of complexity. It is, but I think it's another level of focus that's now come. I don't want to say full circle, but it's certainly come back to being in those top areas that organizations are having to think about is that piece. And it all ultimately comes back to, I think, some of those early opening comments that we all sort of made, which was around that risk profile. Yeah, how do we sort of manage risk on that? And I think, again, some of the feedback I get from organizations that I'm speaking to and some of the surveys we've done recently is, I think there's a bit of a feeling that the C-suite are now having to focus far more on risk, as they always do. So, they should always have a focus on risk, but it perhaps is taking away or slowing down some of the innovation pace. And I think anything that can come through and help, I'll say, remove or reduce that risk profile and allow the business to pivot back. That's something that I'm hearing when I'm talking to organizations, that they're going, we want to keep the pace of innovation. They want to have the ability to leverage this innovation that's out there and create better experiences for their customers. But you have to do it in that safe way. So anything could reduce the risk is an important area as well. I might have opened a whole new can of worms there, by the way, Winston, and something that might sort of flow on to another one of our topics, in the future. But I think that's something that people need to think about as well.
Good point, and I'm trying to plug that can back for a different question. Alex, I just wanted to quickly look at looking at the questions that have come. I'm not going to ask those questions, but I wanted to reframe some of them. While we are looking at data sovereignty, we are looking at data that has already been produced. So we look at it as whether it's sensitive or not sensitive, and then we apply the legislation. But generative AI has that issue where it might generate data that might be considered sensitive or confidential, which then might be retroactively the legislation might act on. Do you see that as a challenge, especially in generative AI world?
We say generative AI. What does it mean, generative AI? Does it mean that we are talking to the artificial brain? No, we're not talking to the artificial brain. We're not talking to the artificial human. So that means that the data that is being generated is coming from the data that has been technically fed into this process before. So if we have the proper sovereignty process set up, we will avoid the risk at the level when we load the data into the model, when we load the data into the algorithm. If we don't have the proper sovereignty process set up at the beginning, we might end up with the risky data being exposed. But in this case, that's again the big question to the level how the governance, sovereignty, and how basically the audit and the master data is being controlled at the beginning. So this is more the question about the practice and the understanding of the nature of data. If we are talking about the future and about all this like futuristic concepts of the GPT 5.0, or even let's be the dreamers, GPT 6.0, and at some point of time we come up with something that is called creative AI, because I heard a few concepts of creative AI and the difference between the generative AI. Then there is a risk. But in this case, the regulation has to be set up on a model by itself, and then the model by itself at the producer level. So in our case, if we use the GPT as an example, then OpenAI. So this is the question to them. Can they generate something that could be considered as the risky data? And if they generate something that is considered as a risky data, should they give us the meta tag, the metadata around this data, and say that this is the risky data? This is potentially the, let's say, some sort of synthetic data about the financial strategy that is quite risky and that we cannot really use. But again, coming back to your original question, we are sitting in an era of generative AI. So whatever we provide into is coming outside. So the result set is being the result from what we bring into the model by itself. If we use the third parties, then the biggest question is, how do we provide the data to third parties? Who is in charge? We are in charge of the business. And if we give someone the potentially vulnerable information from the financial or the personal perspective, then we're in trouble already. So if the model hasn't produced something risky and done some sort of the aggregated output, I would say that this is not correct. We're just lucky. And this is an amazing luck that nothing bad has happened. But the biggest challenge is the way, how do we control the data? And the proper solution for this is something that is being like one of the key aspects of data management in any organizations, and it is a data governance, meta and master data control. So if we don't see the clarity on a normal aggregated data or the normal transactional data with the business, if we don't have the clarity and ownership, what is that on a metadata level, if we cannot define which column in a table is being risky and which column or the object or the node, the cluster is not being risky, then what do we do with data, right? So this is the question for the governance and sovereignty on a very basic level, on a very basic setup. And to be honest with you, with all my practice, I can clearly see that half of the businesses, even in a sectors like finance, insurance, in the sectors like government services, for example, even those businesses are failing. They don't know what they own. They don't have a clear mapping between their data stewards, data custodians, and the type and nature of this data.
Thank you, Alex. It seems like we are just running out of time, although I feel that we are just starting the discussion. So maybe at this time, I'd like to ask Mark to sort of give like a quick summary on his thoughts, how the discussion has been, what people need to take out of this. And Mark, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Winston. And yeah, look, I mean, I guess I've been involved in a few of these, and the time does go quickly, and we sort of hit some good topics. And look, the thing that I'm taking away, today is it seems to be, the market is moving very quickly. That's one of the things, and I think, being prepared to minimize the risk is important and have flexibility. Interestingly, we had the comments around, the sustainability piece. I think that does play into this, and being able to put that data to use and having some flexibility around that. So I think, it's important for organizations to embrace the opportunities around AI. I don't think that's going away. I think there's last year was an experimentation year in some respects. This year, use cases are bedding down, but making sure you've got the right platform to be able to grow with your business, not overcommit your business from day one, is important as well. So, Winston, I put my offer out to anybody. I'd love to catch up and have a longer discussion with this around how we are helping different organizations address these challenges. But look, that's probably the piece that I'm sort of taking away from this. But great discussion. Really appreciate the input from Alex and Pinto. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the audience for joining our conversation. We hope you have you're an hour wiser from all the insights. I've seen the questions from our people, so I would say that we will be posing these questions to our panelists, so they will be answering you on the side. We also want to know how well you thought about this discussion. So please, if you see the QR code, please do scan it and send in your feedback. This will be important for us to actually curate our questions as well as design our next few sessions. While you do that, I would like to say on behalf of Pure Storage, CDOTrends, and our two panelists who have done a bang-up job, Alex and Pinto, thank you for joining us and hope to see you in our next Pure Leadership series. Goodbye for now.